Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
President Trump threatens heavier strikes on Iran if the Houthis hit again. Welcome to the Thursday edition. As the president responds to attacks on two ships in the Red Sea by Houthi rebels in Yemen. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. And Kailey, the market is responding today to the idea of a new front opening in this war.
Yes, responding indeed, with oil, Brent crude at least, topping $100 a barrel once again. We're looking at a more than 6 percentage point move on both Brent and WTI today as the president threatens to effectively hold Iran responsible for the action the Houthis, which are an Iranian-funded proxy, may take in the Red Sea. All of it pointing to escalation as the president, according to Axios reporting at least, is nearing a decision on a potentially, quote, massive attack on Iran.
The next 24 to 48 hours could be interesting here, as we now include the Red Sea on top of the Strait of Hormuz for another potential choke point to consider. And interesting to see interest rates pop higher on all of this, along with oil prices, and it's really depressing stocks. We do have a great opportunity, though, this hour to talk with some stakeholders here on Capitol Hill. Another parade of senators coming up from the Republican side of the aisle, not only weighing in on the war in Iran, but a boatload of legislation that's now headed their way.
Yeah, including funding for the Pentagon related to costs to the Iran war. There's a lot on these senators' agendas, including speaking with us today. We'll speak with Republican Senators Ted Budd of North Carolina and Todd Young of Indiana. Plus, we'll speak with a member of the House of Representatives as well when Congressman Bryan Steil of Wisconsin joins us, too. It's going to be a busy hour, so let's begin it right away as we get a check on the markets with Charlie Pellet. Big move in oil, big moves in a lot of other places, Charlie.
Indeed. Specifically, what's going on with a couple of the tech names that we heard from last night, both Tesla and also Alphabet. Got to begin with crude oil, though. Kailey touched on it there. Right now, looking at a 7% jump in Brent crude, holding above $100, $183 for a barrel of Brent, up now by 7.2%. The move in West Texas Intermediate crude, equally as big, up 6.5%. 92.49 on WTI. Again, that is a move of 6.5%. We'll keep you posted on crude throughout the day. Right now, though, that is moving stocks lower. The S&P is down 87. For the S&P 500 index, a decline now of 1.2%. Dow Industrial is down 464 points on the Dow, a drop of 0.9%, while NASDAQ is down 526 on the NASDAQ Composite Index, a decline there of 2%. NASDAQ 100 Index down 1.7%. Last night we heard from two of the Bloomberg Mag 7 names. Today we've got that index down by 4.5%. Again, bears repeating, Alphabet down by 6.5%. Tesla, though, is down by 13.8% after earnings. The VIX right now is advancing. We've got the VIX holding above 19, Wall Street's so-called fear gauge. The 10-year, 4.69%. Right now, looking at the 10-year, moving higher. We've got the 2-year, 4.35%, and the 30-year, 5.17%. Gold down $77 the ounce for the precious metal, a decline of 1.9%. 4,051, that crude move bears repeating, closing in on 101 for a barrel of Brent now, $100.85, up by 7.2%. I mentioned Alphabet, lower after earnings. The Google parent raising its capital spending forecast to as much as $205 billion this year. Alphabet down 6.6%. Tesla's profit tumbled despite strong EV deliveries in the most recent quarter, pressuring Elon Musk's plan to refocus the company on AI and robots. Tesla shares down now by 13.9%. Also out with earnings last night, we heard from IBM. It cut its full-year sales outlook. IBM shares down 0.2%. Intel will be reporting after the close of trading today. Intel shares down now by just about 1.2%. While we are on earnings, cannot ignore defense companies Lockheed Martin and RTX. They raise their full-year sales outlook as geopolitical tensions around the world boost defense spending. Right now, we got Lockheed Martin shares pushing higher by 9.9%, RTX up 7.9%. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, a comprehensive look at the markets from Charlie Pellet. It's a very busy day. Thank you very much. It's a busy day here in Washington as well, and it's been, frankly, a busy week. The House of Representatives were able to finish their work on some of the must-pass items that the Speaker wanted to see cross the finish line before the recess break yesterday. We, of course, saw the passing of a continuing resolution earlier this week to try to keep the government lights on through to December. A passing yesterday of the budget blueprint, the resolution that would allow for more funding for the Pentagon related to the war with Iran, as well as aid for farmers and a few other things, including money for grants to states to enact voter ID measures. They also were able to pass the National Defense Authorization Act, something that typically happens on a bipartisan basis and indeed did in the House of Representatives. That's one chamber down. Now it becomes a question of the upper chamber, the United States Senate, Joe, which often brings with it its own set of stories and certainly its own set of procedures that sometimes make this battle a little bit more of an uphill climb.
Well, I guess this is going to be a sequencing issue here, right? John Thune wants to do this differently than Speaker Johnson did. And yes, we've seen this movie before. The idea is he wants the government to be funded before we get to any reconciliation or extra Pentagon money here. You know, I recall our conversation with Patrick McHenry yesterday, who described senators as a bunch of bulls sitting out in the sun in a field chewing grass. They are at a different pace and they approach policy differently. And we have one of those bulls with us right now. Senator Ted Budd, the Republican from North Carolina, joins us, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Select Committee on Intelligence. So we're going to have some issues to talk about here when it comes to the war in Iran. But Senator, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's always good to see. I'm just wondering your thoughts on the approach here. Is this the responsible thing to do? Fund the government first, then deal with the extras later?
Well, thanks for the shout out. As a bull, I did grow up on a farm in North Carolina, still live there today. So
there you go.
Give them a shout out when I get back home. So, look, I commend the House for what they did. Speaker Johnson is dealing with a very narrow margin. For him to get on the NDAA and get it passed in a bipartisan fashion, I think that's fine. Look, it's a very different way we look at it over here in the Senate. We want to make sure that the government is funded. We want to look at either regular appropriations rather than a reconciliation. And then let's get on to the NDAA. So we want to do all of these things as well. So I think we have a similar aims, but in a different sequence, as you pointed out earlier. But one of the things we've never seen before is the Democrats play politics with the NDAA. Usually they vote to advance it, and then we negotiate in conference between the Senate version and the House version. They didn't even vote to advance it. We've never seen this before. This just seems like they're punishing our men and women in uniform because of some policy disagreements. That's never been done before. You can have those policy disagreements, but let's make sure we're supporting our warfighters, especially in this unstable time right now. It's absolutely never been done like this, and I can't believe the Democrats are playing politics like they are this week.
Well, there were 6 members of the Democratic caucus in the House who did cross party lines to vote to advance the NDAA yesterday, Senator. But when we consider the defense authorization and the money for the Pentagon that is embedded in the budget resolution that the House also sent over, you testified or gave a statement at the same hearing that the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did before appropriations this week, in which he said the war already has cost $37.5 billion, and the war, as we speak, Senator, is still ongoing. By the time the Senate does get around to passing potentially this resolution or reconciliation getting across the finish line, is the price tag for the Pentagon going to need to be much higher?
Look, I'm very supportive of the point of the supplemental and making sure that we supply our stockpile and our munitions. But let's remember that there's support in there for farmers. There's support in there for disaster in different parts of the country. Let's remember in Western North Carolina, just under 2 years ago, we had a major disaster with Hurricane Helene. So when they give us the number 0 for that, that's the wrong number. We want real support for Western North Carolina, especially if it's going to include something broader than just defense replenishment. We want to make sure that they have what they need, that the Pentagon has what it needs. But if you're going to include disaster, you make sure that you include Western North Carolina.
I want to ask you about the war in Iran, which appears to be escalating by the moment. And to that end, we're now seeing $100 a barrel oil once again, Senator. From your view on the Armed Services Committee and Intel, I'm wondering what you're hearing from the administration. Axios is reporting the president is soon to decide on a major escalation, a major assault on parts of Iran. He's threatening bridges and power plants. Is this about to intensify?
Well, the goal is to open the Strait and make sure that we keep our warfighters safe and eventually bring them home. We don't want a forever war. So the president wants all options on the table. He wants the best military advice. He wants to be decisive. He's tired of playing games. Look, he was serious about negotiations and the ceasefire to use for negotiations to end this diplomatically. But the Iranians were only using it to delay and diffuse, delay things into perpetuity, which is part of their strategy. They know that they can't win, but they can succeed through delay and then operating in a diffused manner through proxies, through the Yemenis and the Houthis, or through Hamas or through Hezbollah. So all of those are Iranian proxies. So if you cut off the head of the snake, you fix so many problems. But the president wants to end this decisively and get our troops home.
Well, and as you say, Senator, you don't want to see another forever war. So how long should the president have to try to bring this to an end? You and your colleagues voted down another war powers resolution in the Senate today, even though one did pass the House this morning. Will there come a time ever that you would cast a vote on a war powers measure? What would be the line for you?
Well, the challenge with the war powers resolution, while it may sound great on its face, and we certainly need to have those constitutional debates, the president needs every option at his disposal, especially when he's navigating very complex waters in the Middle East. Anytime you pass a war powers resolution, as we've seen pop through the House or the Senate at any particular time in the last several weeks, it weakens the president's hand, which is really putting our war fighters in danger. We want to end this quickly, and so we need to present a unified strength, or unified front and full strength, and that way we can win more quickly. Anytime they see us fractured internally, our opponents will use that to their advantage, which hurts our men and women in uniform.
You know, we're looking now at a potential double choke point, and you don't need me to tell you, as Houthi rebels attack a couple of ships headed for the Red Sea. Do people in North Carolina need to brace for higher prices? We're looking at triple-digit oil today, and gas is well above $4 on a national average. If this is another choke point, Senator, what does it mean for consumers?
Well, the goal is to get energy prices down. They were trending down under President Trump because we've basically been pro-energy. That's what puts us at this position. When you look under Joe Biden in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, you saw these prices skyrocket, well over $100 a barrel, gas, $5 a gallon in some parts of the country. And that's because they were anti-energy. We're having a significant conflict in the Middle East, and yet we're $3.50, $4, and we want to get it back closer in that $2, $3 range. But we can certainly do that because we've been pro-energy. If we allow the broader administration policies to take place, those choke points in the Middle East actually matter less. So we need to make sure that we're pro-energy for domestic production here in the U.S., and that actually makes us safer and less dependent on these Middle Eastern choke points. But I will say, there are so many allies that we have over there. We have troops in the region, even before this conflict. So we need to make sure that we defend them, and we don't let the chief state sponsor of terror metastasize and actually get a toehold again. We need to end this, and we need to do it decisively, and we need to do it quickly and bring our troops home safely.
All right, we will leave it on that note. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. The Republican representing North Carolina in the United States Senate, Ted Budd, thank you for being here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And as we reflect on our conversation with the senator and on congressional matters, we turn now to our political panel as Jeanne Zaino, a Bloomberg politics contributor, Democratic analyst, and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, joins us alongside John Seaton today, a Republican strategist and founder and CEO of Echo Canyon Consulting. Welcome to you both. John, we were just hearing from the senator there that the Senate is likely going to try to do things in a different order than maybe the House or the president would desire. We may see some changes to this budget reconciliation effort, and it will be under the leadership of the majority leader, John Thune, who the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said today Trump's patience with Thune is, quote, running out, to which John Thune responded to reporters on Capitol Hill saying, well, maybe she or somebody else ought to get on the phone and get the votes. Are we about to see a real breakdown here between the White House and the Senate leadership?
I'm not so sure. I do think that there's, a little bit of saber rattling from time to time. But from what I understand, Leader Thune and the White House have a very good relationship. I mean, look, at the end of the day, you've got to be able to count to 50 and sometimes 60 when you're trying to get things through the Senate. And as much as the leader or the White House might want to get something passed, you're still kind of at the mercy of each individual senator, a lot of whom have very strong opinions, have very strong beliefs on how things need to get done. Some of them are in for very tough re-election fights, and so I do think that there may be a little bit of saber rattling. I don't think that there's going to be a full-on collapse of relations there. I think that the relationship is still pretty good.
Jeanne, you heard Ted Budd talk about the NDAA. Pointing directly to Democrats for playing politics with what we always refer to as must-pass legislation, the last bastion of bipartisan agreement. How would you respond to him?
Yeah, I think the response is pretty clear. It's that the Republicans have been weaponizing this bill. It's a hyper-partisan bill. There's poison pill amendments in it. There's culture war agenda items in it. They haven't even addressed the issue of this unauthorized war. And so this is where Democrats are ready for this fight. They want to take this fight on. And I would just note the interview you guys did yesterday with Rand Paul. I mean, they are talking about a 1.5, and I understand NDAA is not appropriation, but they're talking $1.5 trillion for defense. That is essentially going to support a war that is unauthorized and widely unpopular without any offsets at a time when our budget is closing in, our deficit rather, is closing in on $40 trillion. You add that to things about gender care, the Save America Voting Act, all of the other things that they have coupled together here. And they are the ones playing politics with this. And that's why Democrats, unlike in the past, feel confident in saying that this is not your grandfather's NDAA, Joe. I guess that's how I would put it. It's a hyper-partisan bill coming from the Republicans.
Well, and obviously coming during active wartime, John, as we mentioned with the Senate did not advance a war powers resolution today. The House did this morning, but these are all pre-August recess votes. And I wonder, once we're back from recess, it's past Labor Day, the midterms are literally around the corner, if you think this is going to be a different story.
I think an NDAA is going to pass. It might be slimmed down somewhat or a lot. And whatever your opinion of the conflict in Iran is right now, our warfighters do need to get the resources that they need to finish the job. So I do think that something will pass. And whether it's exactly what the White House wants or what House leadership wants remains to be seen. In fact, I would go so far as to say it probably will not be exactly what they want. That's part of governing. But I do think an NDAA has to pass and will pass.
How about war powers, John, just to pick up on what Kailey was referring to? If we get past primary season, is it open season?
I think these are largely symbolic votes. I don't think that they're going to make much of a difference. I do think that you saw, even though it did pass the House very narrowly, Republicans are largely unified and continue to support the president, continue to support the effort in Iran. I expect the same on the Senate side as well. So I don't know that a War Powers Act will come up for a vote. And if it does, I'm not sure how much teeth it really has.
All right. We've got a lot more where this came from with our political panel. John Seaton and Jeanne Zaino will be back as we also spend some time ahead with Bryan Steil, the congressman from Wisconsin who authored the stock trading ban. And we'll be speaking as well with Senator Todd Young, the Republican from Indiana, continuing our conversation today with lawmakers after a flurry of bills are passed in the House of Representatives. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu. Thanks for being with us. On Balance of Power, it's the Thursday edition. As we make our way through the trading session, we'll get an update as well from Charlie Pellet. The news from Iran sending oil prices back to triple digits and stocks sharply lower. This is Bloomberg.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We begin with a developing story headline right off the Bloomberg. The government will begin rulemaking aimed at shoring up car door safety. Vehicles designed with flush electrically operated door handles made by Tesla and other car makers have been involved in a series of incidents in which occupants have been trapped inside their cars after accidents. Today we're looking at Tesla shares. They are down, way down after earnings. They're plunging now by almost 14%. Stocks lower, oil higher. West Texas Intermediate crude 92.72 a barrel, up 6.7%. Barrel of Brent has just topped $101 now, up by 7.4%. Oil higher, stocks lower. S&P down 1.2%. Tech selling off. Nasdaq 100 down 1.8% with a 10-year at 4.69%. Recapping, S&P 500 index down 1.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet, Joe and Kailey. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Charlie Pellet with us live from New York, and he'll have more on the markets coming up in about 20 minutes' time. We have been talking about some of the legislation that actually managed to pass the House of Representatives. It's some pretty big bills, including a stock trading ban that we haven't had a chance to invest ourselves in much this hour, but one that is extremely important to our audience. Now, House lawmakers, for the most part, are leaving town and leaving, as we just discussed with Congressman Ted Budd, a boatload of legislation in the upper chamber. One of them includes a ban on lawmakers buying stocks, along with the continuing resolution we saw passed this week and the supplemental funding bill that will become potentially law through the form of reconciliation. But we talked about the stock trading ban, something that has been debated and considered a high point of controversy in the House, not for months, but for years. With Congressman Chip Roy, the Republican from Texas, had a competing bill that actually would have required members to divest their holdings as they joined the ranks of the House. Here's what he told us.
If you have insider trading, you can go get convicted of that right now. It's about trust. It's about believing that your members of Congress are actually making decisions in their committees and on the floor that are in their interest, the people's interest, not the interest of their financial interest. You've got people who believe they've got the right to do it, right? That as a member, as a citizen, they have the right to trade stocks, that we can't limit that. I disagree. It is a privilege to serve in the United States Congress.
Well, they're not going to be able to trade stocks, or it seems buy new ones based on the law or the bill, I should say, that just passed. We'll see if it becomes a law as we spend time with its author. A familiar voice on this program, Congressman Bryan Steil, the Republican from Wisconsin who chairs the House Administration Committee, joins us now. Mr. Chairman, it's great to see you. Congratulations on the bill passing the House of Representatives. What becomes of it now?
Thanks for having me back on, Joe. Excited to see the Stop Insider Trading Act pass the House yesterday with strong bipartisan support. We now look to our colleagues in the United States Senate. I've had a lot of good conversations with folks on that side of the Capitol. And I think there's actually real energy to get this done. The bill hits the target. It prevents members of Congress from buying and selling individual companies' shares of stock. The bill has real teeth. It's common sense, it's practical, and it works. I'd love to see the Senate take this up and move it. The American people understand the importance of this legislation, and I think there's a real chance, despite the fact that the Senate's got a lot on their plate, that this ultimately gets across the line.
Well, and if it does get across the line, should this effort end here? Congressman, is just banning the buying and selling of individual stocks while in office enough, or does this need to go a step further in future legislation to include divestitures like your colleague Chip's Roy bill, or to include other branches of government like, say, the White House and the president?
Washington often makes incremental progress, but I think this is a big step forward. Yes, I do agree that there are additional reforms that we can make, in particular, not just as it relates to Congress, but executive branch employees and the judiciary as well, things that we're looking at. But we have a time and a moment right now to begin making progress. The progress the House made yesterday, the Senate should be able to pick this up and move it across. And then let's go back and continue to make progress on the reforms I think are needed to clean up Washington.
Interesting. Congressman, the Clarity Act, we'd like to hear more from you on the future of crypto here, because the narrative this morning is that this bill could be dead based on not only disagreement over the ethics language, but now there's renewed concern over what we thought was an agreement on stablecoin yield. Few people know this matter better than you. Is clarity in risk of dying?
Sometimes it's the darkest before the dawn, and that's my hope as it relates to market structure legislation that the Senate has been struggling with for over a year. The House passed this bill now last July. Now is the time for the Senate to complete the job. I'm hopeful that a resolution is struck, that Democrats in the Senate understand the need to put regulatory clarity in this space. It's important that the United States is leading, that these technologies are not being developed offshore in locations like China, but also that there are appropriate consumer protections as the House passed clarity bill has. And so right now we're watching how the sausage gets made a little bit. There's frustrations in the Senate. They're not able to finalize the agreement. My hope is that now that there's actual text on paper released on the Senate side, the final negotiations will come. We'll actually get this done before the Senate leaves for the summer.
Well, and on the ethics provisions specifically, which sunset on inauguration day of the next president, don't include all family members of elected officials and are enforced by the DOJ, I wonder if you really think that has teeth, Congressman, or if that reads as something that the president is willing to sign off on because it may not really affect him greatly.
Well, maybe two pieces of this. One, I think that is the opening salvo over on the Senate side. I would expect that there be adjustments and reforms to that language before a final deal is struck. Again, that's this final negotiation that's taking place. And two, to the folks that think we need more regulation in this space on the ethics side, that is in many ways the point of clarity, is to provide a regulatory framework so that bad actors can be held accountable. The good actors in the broader crypto space also want to remove the bad actors. This is our real opportunity to clean up what I view as the mess that was created in large part by Gary Gensler and the Biden administration for failing to provide a functional regulatory framework in the digital asset space.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations again on your bill passing yesterday. We'll see what becomes of it in the Senate. Republican Congressman Bryan Steil of Wisconsin here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Now, as we shift our focus from domestic to foreign affairs, we, of course, have a fresh threat from President Trump against Iran today, threatening to hold Iran accountable for the action of Houthi rebels after the Houthis said that they targeted two Saudi ships in the Red Sea, igniting concern around a choke point situation for global energy markets and sending Brent crude back above $100 a barrel today. So we turn for more insight to Mona Yacoubian now, who is director and senior advisor of the Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mona, when we consider, and welcome back to Balance of Power, the president continually escalating his rhetoric and threatening to escalate attacks in tandem, is Iran likely to respond, or are they willing to call the bluff?
I think Iran is likely to respond with escalation of its own. We don't see any signs that Iran is relenting in the face of increased U.S. military pressure. Quite the contrary. You note the action by the Houthis, throwing into peril now the choke point at the Bab el-Mandeb. We're seeing Iran also hit back with strikes. There's no indication at this point that Iran is going to back down.
So is this now a two-front war?
Well, it already is a two-front war if we think about Lebanon, but I think we could say, Joe, this is absolutely an expanding war, and I fear that we are really on the verge of an all-out confrontation once again that encompasses the entirety of the Middle East, but that also has enormous implications for the global economy. Again, given this potential for a double choke point blockage, which would have terrible repercussions for the global economy.
How would an all-out confrontation look different in July compared to what it looked like in March, Mona? I just wonder what realistically you think could be changed, could be more dramatic than when we saw the first round of Operation Epic Fury.
You're absolutely right. I mean, there is no question. I think a couple things are different, though. We now, as I said before, we now have the Houthis engaged, which was not the case in the earlier iteration of this conflict. We also see the Iranians striking much more intently and intensively on U.S. military targets. Note, of course, the tragic loss of 4 service members over the weekend. And we're also, I think, seeing Iran again returned to hitting critical infrastructure, and the U.S. also hitting critical infrastructure. There is a concern, I don't know that it's going to happen, but there is a concern that the U.S. could even be preparing for some kind of ground incursion. So all of those elements would differentiate what we might see in the coming days from what's already happened.
With that potential for a ground incursion that you mentioned, Mona, is that why we saw a B-1 bomber reintroduced, at least one of them, long-range bomber that can carry dozens of cruise missiles, 2,000-pound bombs? This is the first time that the bomber was used in this latest series of attacks. We're clearly preparing the ground for something here, right?
Well, yes, I think the 2,000-pound bombs, et cetera, suggests an intensified air war, which of course was the case early on. I think, Joe, what's more important to watch is where the U.S. is striking. So there's reports of the U.S. striking along the Iran-Iraq border, for an example. And that is raising questions as to whether the U.S. might be making preparation to insert special forces somewhere in Iran. Again, hard to know, and I'm wary, quite frankly, of speculating too much because we simply don't have that information.
Mona, I'd like to ask you as well about the civil nuclear deal that was signed between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia yesterday, but which President Trump now suggests today is actually going to be contingent on Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords. He said it will be approved, but is subject to that Abraham Accords expansion. Does that mean all of this is likely to happen?
I think the president's latest statement adding that condition throws the deal into doubt. The Saudis have been very clear that they are not ready to normalize ties with Israel. They want to see significant progress made toward a Palestinian state. And so they are saying the deal's been signed already, and that wasn't one of the conditions. And so I think, at a minimum, we could say this deal, which has caused quite a lot of consternation, I might add, for those that are concerned about nuclear nonproliferation, I think we could say that at this point, the deal has really been thrown into question as to its actual status and what happens.
All right, Mona, thank you. It's great to have you back. Mona Yacoubian, Director, Senior Advisor, Middle East Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I'm pretty sure this is all going to come up in an important program that we have for you teed up for 5 p.m. Eastern Time today here on Bloomberg TV and radio with an important town hall with the candidates to be the next Secretary General of the UN. This will be moderated by Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick live from the UN in New York. And Kailey, this is going to be a fascinating listen. I don't know the last time you and I have been able to watch TV together at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, it's going to be a nice change of pace for us. But of course, our work is not over for the day yet. We still have more of the early edition of Balance of Power coming up. We're going to go back to Capitol Hill. We'll be joined by Republican Senator Todd Young of Indiana for more on the war with Iran and the matters facing his chamber. That's straight ahead here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Oil pushing higher right now. Barrel of Brent taking out $101, 101.15 on Brent now, up by 7.5%. West Texas Intermediate crude back above $92 a barrel, 92.70 now, surging 6.8%. Oil higher, stocks lower. Right now, the S&P 500 index holding just above 7,400. It is down 98 points, looking at a loss of 1.3%. Dow Industrials down 574, decline there of 1.1%. Nasdaq Composite down 576, a drop there of 2.3%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 index is down 4.7%. Last night we heard from two members. We heard from Alphabet. That stock now down 6.5%. We heard from Tesla. Tesla now down by 14.3%. The 10-year, 4.69%. The 2-year, 4.35%. And the 30-year, 5.17%. The VIX, by the way, above 19 now. Spot gold down 2.1%, 4,042 the ounce. And again, crude WTI bears repeating, up 6.9%. Barrel of Brent 101.29, up by 7.7%. Our Eric Weiner will have a whole lot more on the markets coming up for you in just a moment. In terms of earnings, American Airlines cutting its 2026 guidance for the second time in 3 months. Higher fuel prices will do that. We've got American now down by 9.6%. Tough day for airline names. United down 3.2%. Delta down 2.6%. And right now we've got Southwest lower by 5.2%. For the first time in 10 years, the United Nations is set for a leadership change. Join us at 5 o'clock Wall Street time for a special town hall with candidates seeking to become the next UN Secretary General. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, we're going to have a viewing party down here at the D.C. Bureau. You should join us. It's going to be something else. 5 p.m. Eastern, we will all be watching with some important debate and analysis here on Bloomberg TV, as always, as you would expect. Interesting what is up today. As Charlie just made clear, it's interest rates and oil, and that has everything to do with what's taking place in Iran and what may be about to take place. Because you could argue that this is a market that has been whistling past the graveyard, with the president of the United States now threatening further escalation now that the Houthi rebels are involved, attacking 2 ships in the Red Sea. We talked about this with Bob McNally from Rapidan Energy, who sees the potential for much higher prices for oil and distillates. Here's what he said.
There's enormous optimism in the price. One of the distinctive features of this whole thing has been an entrenched optimism among traders. Look at equities, haven't even looked back since early April. And I think that optimism is unwarranted. And I think that bubble could burst. And if so, we are going to reprice much higher, I'm afraid.
All right, let's get to what's happening in the markets right now with Eric Weiner, who joins us live from New York, senior editor for Equities. Eric, it's great to have you back. Is this as simple as Iran sends bonds lower, interest rates higher, oil prices higher, and unfortunately stocks lower?
And one other thing, AI spending. So what you're seeing, this is a
Throw
huge...
Alphabet in the mix.
Yeah, and this is a huge big tech sell-off. That's really what's driving all of this. Last night, Alphabet came out and said it's going to spend like $200 billion this year on AI. And the big change is that used to be considered good news. The idea that companies were spending on AI would send their stocks up. In the last, well, it started happening in the first quarter, but really in the last couple of months, they are getting punished. And we are seeing it. And a lot of, you can't take that away from what's going on in Iran and what's going on with oil prices, because if growth weakens and if inflation is sticky, which are the 2 things that happen with war, then this whole thing does have to get repriced. And the ability to keep spending on AI, the ability for that to be the pillar of growth for the economy, really starts to look wobbly. And that's what we're seeing today.
Well, yeah, as you consider companies wanting to spend more capital and higher oil prices risking higher rates and therefore a higher price, a higher cost of capital. Eric, so maybe these stories can't be completely unwound from each other, but if it really is also in part a tech-driven market, what other earnings should we be looking forward to, whether it's after the bell today or over the course of the next week, to potentially be catalyst? Do we expect it's going to be a very similar story where it's really the CapEx number, not EPS or revenue or anything else that the market's watching for?
It's not just the CapEx number, it's the CapEx outlook. But yes, so next week we've got Meta, we've got Amazon, we've got Microsoft. All of the big spenders come next week. So that's really, it used to be that NVIDIA was the one we need to watch, and that's usually towards the end of earnings season. But right now, it's the capital expenditures. And the other thing about rates is if these stocks fall, the ability for them to raise money by issuing more stock becomes less. So then they have to go into the debt market, and those rates are not looking great. So it just becomes much, much more expensive to do what they were planning to do at the very beginning of the year.
Indeed. All right, Eric Weiner covering the equity markets for us. He's our senior editor for equities at Bloomberg, joining us from New York. Thank you so much. And as Eric was just running us through, a lot of this could ultimately come down to the outlook for rates, inflation, and how that is driven by the price of oil, which, as we've told you, is north of $100 a barrel for Brent crude once again today. A lot of that having to do with the ongoing difficulty around the Strait of Hormuz and now potentially with the Red Sea. We heard from President Trump about Hormuz in particular and how much the U.S. should care about that waterway yesterday as he spoke in Georgia.
We don't need the Hormuz Strait, but we do it because we have to do it, because we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. They're getting hit so hard, and they want to make a deal. But I say they're not ready to make a deal, because every time they make a deal, they want to change it and everything. They're not ready. They'll be ready very soon.
So for more, we go back now live to Capitol Hill, where we're joined by Republican Senator Todd Young of Indiana, who is a member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Senator, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. We heard the president there talking about the Strait of Hormuz, but it seems no longer to just be about the Strait, but also about the Red Sea in the aftermath of the attack Houthis say they conducted on 2 Saudi ships yesterday. The president is now threatening to hold Iran accountable for any such Houthi attacks. But if this has indeed spread to a second waterway, if the front is widening, how much more difficult is it going to be for the United States military to maintain control?
Well, it is going to be more challenging, Kailey. It does look like the Houthi movement, which is affiliated with and a franchise of this regime in Tehran, looks like they are complicating efforts to deliver oil and other supplies through the Red Sea by closing off the Bab el-Mandab Strait, which is another choke point in addition to the Strait of Hormuz. So this is why the president believes that we, of course, need to get more leverage and then get the Iranians back to the table for a negotiated settlement. But as they have proven time and time again, they're not feeling the heat enough. And so, unfortunately, it's going to require the threat of more military force, perhaps more military force. It's the president's job to make the case that we need to do that and to lay out a more clear strategy on a going forward basis. But the number one goal of this conflict we can't lose sight of, and that is to secure the nuclear materials, remove them if possible, and then establish a verifiable enforcement regime for whatever political settlement might ultimately be agreed upon. It looks like we're a long way away, and there is going to be elevated prices that flow throughout our economy on account of the heightened energy prices and lingering uncertainty, and that, of course, is something we're feeling at home.
Yeah, we're seeing American Airlines shares now down 10% on this jump in oil prices alone, Senator. It's good to have you, and we remind our audience that you are a captain in the United States Marine Corps, a graduate of the Naval Academy, and I'm wondering your thoughts on the targeting selection and the fact that we used a B-1 bomber apparently last evening for the first time since the resumption of hostilities. What are we planning for here, Senator, if not the potential for a ground incursion?
Well, again, I don't believe that the president has made a decision on that. As he makes that sort of decision, one would hope he'd let members of Congress know and make the case to the American people. But you know, the use of a B-1 platform typically involves both operational needs, but also psychological. If we can get into the minds of the IRGC leadership, which is really, by so many accounts, really in charge of the country, but also to the dear leader's mind, then perhaps we can get them back to the table and change their risk calculus as it relates to coming up with a negotiated settlement. So that's what I make of both an operational and what we call in the military a PSYOPs decision to employ the B-1.
Well, obviously, there's the kind of tactical military pressure that the U.S. is trying to apply on Iran. There's the question of economic pressure as well. And President Trump has pushed for sanctions and secondary tariffs being able to be applied to buyers of Russian oil to be included in the sanctions bill that was intended to be targeted toward Russia, authored by your late colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham, which I know you signed on to as a co-sponsor. Punchbowl News reported today that your majority leader, John Thune, says Iran sanctions have been attached to the Russia sanctions bill. Do you support that? Does it complicate its passage?
I don't think it does complicate its passage significantly. I sure hope not. I think even if some of my Democratic colleagues oppose continuing to use military force to accomplish our ultimate objective here vis-a-vis Iran, they still should continue to favor economic sanctions. In fact, one would argue that in the absence of this military force, you'd even need more economic sanctions to bring this regime into a position of better behavior. So I think the addition of that to the Ukraine sanctions, the Russia sanctions in the Ukraine context should be a sweetener as opposed to anything that would undermine its appeal to my Democratic colleagues. But with that said, it's a political season, and I know that electoral politics play into these decisions a lot, unfortunately. So let's see if we can get it passed.
Well, the NDAA is making its way to the Senate right now, and that was actually in question until that passed the House. Your SHIPS Act, bill to promote domestic shipbuilding, made it through as part of the NDAA. What will be its fate in the Senate?
Well, I believe the SHIPS Act will ultimately pass. 2/3 of this legislation found its way into the National Defense Bill. We have already a strategy teased out to get the additional third done, but the National Defense Bill broadly has been a bipartisan piece of legislation and among for a number of years now, and I think that ultimately, perhaps not until after the election, we'll see this version of the NDAA being signed into law, and the ships component of it is really essential. I mean, the fact that we built just one ocean-going vessel in this country last year, and China has the capacity in a given year to build over 1,000, is an acute national security situation. I've laid out the case for this multiple times, but blessedly, this happens to be the sort of issue where the solution is appealing to most Americans. Not only do we have an opportunity to remedy the defects of our sea power, but we can put a lot of manufacturing workers to work, earning good wages throughout the industrial Midwest, building vessels, and so it's really appealing at home as well. So we will be making American ships again. I think in short order, working with the South Koreans, the Japanese, and others to relearn this discipline, but also to crowd in private capital as we implement this bill.
Well, so we'll see the timing around that and the wider NDAA passing in the Senate. There's also the questions of the continuing.
Here. We're dealing with your audio.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. We thank Senator Todd Young for his time. We were running out of time anyway. The Republican from Indiana joining us. So great to have him back on Bloomberg TV and radio. I was going to ask him about the other many matters that the Senate's now going to have before it, not just the NDAA, but a continuing resolution to fund the government beyond the election, a budget resolution to provide more money to the Pentagon and farmers, and even provide grants to states for election integrity purposes the president has been pushing for, and a congressional stock trading ban. It's not clear if any of those things are going to get done with the next, week and change before the Senate breaks for its August recess?
This is why we might be waiting, or the Pentagon more specifically be waiting for the supplemental money that is requested for operations in Iran. John Thune wants to do government funding and a continuing resolution first. But we've been told from Pete Hegseth and the top brass that they need that money now, that this will be an urgent matter by the time this gets to the Senate.
Of course, a number of Democrats, including Senator Alyssa Slotkin, who you both spoke with yesterday, suggested there is money there for the Pentagon to access. They just need
big, beautiful bill.
Decide to do it.
We'll figure this out one of these days. Make sure you're tuning in 5 p.m. Eastern for Romaine, live from the UN and the town hall for the next UN Secretary General.